Okay, so what I'm about to do here is I've played a bunch of games. I'm currently Diamond rank, which sounds low, but for right now is actually pretty high. I did my hyper climb. I did Diamond. I played a lot of games. I am going to give you my unofficial, no stats. I haven't looked at our internal stats. My work computer hasn't been on. But this is just my opinion of where the meta is. And the reason this is valuable is what we do is we take my experience combined with other players' experiences and opinions, combined with data, and those are the three things we'll use to make the patch, right? And so, are things working the way we intended? Stuff like that. So here's my assessment. And I'm just going to go pretty fast on anything that's not a major deal right now. Amumu, fine. His dealing with a trait, but he's fine for a 1 cost. Not a big deal. Darius is good. Conqueror Opener's good. I wouldn't buff Darius. Draven's in a good spot. Totally fine. Aurelia, little weak, but Rebel's in a good spot, so not really an issue right now. Lux, secretly OP. Pretty good. A lot of high elo players know she's OP. We've had a few people ask her for a nerf, even though the data on hers is like terrible. When I say data, I mean public tactics.tools data. But like Lux is not getting buffed. Lux is fine. Maddie's probably fine. Morgana, I think, is a little weak, especially at 3-star. I think she's impossible to play at 3-star. And I think right now, if you have an AP opener, you'd much rather go Lux than Morgana. The only thing is Morgana is part of Black Rose, so you have to be careful there. Powder, we just talked about briefly. But the problem with Powder is frontline is insane, backline is awful. Can't really buff one without the other right now without like a complete tooltip rework. So probably is just going to stay as is for now. If Ambusher got nerfed, could see her getting buffed. But considering we're past low clock for the patch, can't really do anything anyway. Singed is fine for what he's supposed to be. Wouldn't buff him. He's a terrible tank, but he's always going to be. He's Chem Baron, and his spell is a buff to somebody, so he's always going to be bad. Steb, I actually think, needs a small buff. Very small buff. Right now, I believe of the 3 front lines, Watcher, Bruiser, and Sentinel, Bruisers are the worst, but you can't buff the trait because like Bruiser Garen and Bruiser Mundo are already good enough. You don't need to make them better. So you have to buff the units. I think Steb could use a buff. Trundle, I think's fine. If you told me he's like 3% weak, I'd believe it, but he's fine. Vex is the one that me and the finalization team never agree on. I still think she's weak. People have said she's fine. At the very least, 3-star definitely needs a buff. 1 and 2, I at least see the debate, and she is a rebel, so could leave it alone. Violet, I actually think is completely fine right now. I think for what she's supposed to do, she's exactly where she's supposed to be. So after the C patch and everything, she's fine. Zyra, I think, is close enough. I think, if anything, Zyra gets benefited from any Sork buffs, but I think Zyra's fine. Akali, I think, is in a really good spot. I think there are secret Akali comps that people play from the right spot. Akali's good. Camille is like my number 2 nerf. If I were going to do anything, Camille needs nerfed. The fact that you'd rather have Camille over Smeech is not okay. Camille is just doing muff. Violet Knight need another 10 AD. Okay, come on now. For me, especially, this heal 40% of the damage dealt. The fact that you get 40% built-in healing is nuts. Also, Hodge might just be OP, but the fact that you go like Hodge Camille every time is pretty nutty. So, Leona, I think, is fine. Will benefit from any Academy buffs. Nocturne is really, really close. I've seen people make Nocturne work. He's really hard to make work, but when he works, he's a god. I think, if anything, he gets buffs from like Automata buffs rather than himself. If anything needed buffed, I could see his like bleed getting buffed a little bit, but overall have not had a problem with Nocturne. Rel is close enough. I wouldn't buff her right now. Renata, I do think, needs a small buff. She's not really exciting. Like, if you have a 2-star Renata on 2-1, you're sad, and that's not okay. I think Renata could use a buff. Set's fine. Set is going to be the worst tank in the game for the entire set. It's just his spell. His spell has no tank, so you're never going to put items on this guy. He does his job, but you can't buff him. So, Tristana I actually think could use a very tiny buff. If not, Artillerist will get buffed. Tristana's a little below the line, so yeah, Tristana's close though. It can't be the stacking. Yeah. Urgot's fine. I've actually seen some people make some pretty insane Urgot builds work right now, so I wouldn't touch Urgot. Vander's fine. Vlad, I actually thought needed a buff, but after playing it more, I think is fine. You could make the argument 3-star needs a buff, but I don't even believe with that, so I think Vlad's fine. Zeri is really, really close. I've made Zeri work. The problem is Zeri falls off late game. Zeri is also a byproduct of like, well, why would you play Zeri when Cog is always better? So that's the challenge with Zeri. Zeri's also really hard item bound. I don't think it's as simple as buffing her. In the game I made her work, like she dominated. So it's really, really close. She's one that we're gonna have to like think about. Ziggs just needs a buff. You never play this guy past like stage 3. Ziggs is not good. Blitzcrank I also think is a little weak. I don't think anyone's ever been excited to run tank Blitzcrank right now. Again, partly automata, partly just Blitz is hard to play, and partly that Dominator has this really high cap. Cassio's fine. Ezreal actually secretly is like close to fine. He's never the star. He's always like part of Academy or part of Rebel or part of Artillerist. He's in this awkward position, but like he actually does a lot of damage. I think he does need a small buff, but it'd be really small. How is Cassio fine? Cassio's fine. Cassio does really well. Gangplank, this is Frontline. Frontline, I think, needs a small buff. No one's playing Frontline. Backline, I think, is fine. I would not buff Backline in the slightest. Backline works. If you ever get Conqueror Backline Gangplank, you can win games off that. That stuff's good. Kog'Maw, like I said, he has a weird shape. He's being carried by Scar right now. That's part of it. Automata's terrible. I could see him needing a nerf if Automata gets a very large buff. The other thing is that Kog'Maw has this really toxic curve where stage 2 and 3, he's probably the best unit in the game, but by stage 5, he's like actually not that good. He just gets carried by Scar. So I would rather nerf Scar than him. I think he's actually kind of close to fine. Loris needs a buff. Literally the worst tank. Like, you're never excited to put items on Loris, ever. So, Nami's fine. Nami's in a really good spot. Nunu, I think, is, like, close. The only thing is Nunu's always going to be overshadowed by Mundo. So, Nunu's just in a weird spot in the trait web. But I think Nunu's fine. Rennie's in a good spot. I could see Rennie getting a tiny buff of the heal, but it'd have to be really tiny. So, I think Rennie's fine. Scar, I want to punch in the face. I hate this champ. I hate what he does to the set. I hate that we have a tank that heals insane amounts and also CCs 3 people. Like, what if we gave Shen every 6 seconds heals for 30%, and stuns people, and does... Like, Scar is insane. Scar is insane. And he's carrying Kog'Maw, and that shows, like, people do this thing where they always want the champ to be nerfed, like, the carry. But it's actually Scar. Scar is 100% carrying the Kog'Maw comp. So, Scar is insane. Smeech is fine. He's close to fine. If you told me he needed a tiny buff, maybe. But, like, when 3-star Smeech gets Smeeching all over the face, it sucks to get Smeeched on. I think he's close to fine. Swain, Frontline. Okay, Swain is just like Kog'Maw. Swain has this really annoying curve. Where Swain on stage 2 and 3 is insane and like probably the best tank in the game, and then you have Swain in stage 4 and 5 and he's garbage, and 3-star is garbage, and you can never make him do any work because he just gets bursted on because his spell has him monolocked for 6 seconds, and so Swain is kind of mediocre after that. But really, really good opener. Just amazing opener. Swain backline's good. People are finally discovering some of the builds that make him work. I would not buff Swain backline. TF, I do think, needs a buff. You have to be careful with Quick Striker, but I think TF is like the most mediocre unit in the set. He's not terrible, but like if you invest in him, you regret it. You regret it. Hey, Mort, are the devs aware of the Infinite Chem Baron cash out? That's been bugged. That's been fixed a week ago. Old news, kid. Ambessa. Ambessa is also another one that's like right on the line. People are still figuring out her best in slot items. I could see her getting like 10 mana off her spell so that she can cast a little bit more. Medler actually sent me the really funny comment. He's like, how did you guys make Ambessa so lore accurate? The way she just lets go right when they're about to die and then walks away and leaves to go fight something else. It's perfect. It's just like what she did all the time. Because she always just leaves everything just barely alive. So, Corki I think is fine. Does really well in Scrap. Will benefit from any Artillerist buffs. Mundo, this Mundo champion is going to be such a pain to balance because when he is not like fully stacked with his traits and items, he's like mediocre to bad. But like 6 Dominator, woo! Bruiser, woo! Like he probably needs a nerf because his ceiling is insane, but like maybe not. Maybe he's supposed to be the line. It's just he's insane. He's so close. So this is one where it's like I would want to get more info, but like he's definitely strong. He's definitely strong. Echo I think is really close. He's another one that like people are slowly figuring out. I wouldn't buff if he got buffed, it'd be minor. But the problem with buffing him is he's one of those champions that will just firelight to the back and kill their backline, and they'll be like, F this game. So I think he's close. Elise I actually think is right in the right spot, both front and back. Wouldn't buff or nerf any of them. Garen, if you told me Garen needs a tiny nerf to his health scaling, I'd believe it, but otherwise he's pretty close. Garen's a 4-cost. He's a tank. He's fun. His emissary bonus is fun to use. Stacking Warmogs is fun. I don't know. I think he's another one, by the way, that like he's right next to Scar. So sometimes you have to place Firelight Garen, and you're like, so fun. Firelight Garen, so fun. But I think Garen himself is actually pretty fine. Heimerdinger is like 4th on the nerf list for me. Heimerdinger is too strong. He's just easily the best 4-cost. He doesn't even need his traits. It's like you give him 2 visionary, he's good to go. Who cares about his traits? So I think he does need a pretty chunky nerf. I could see a 10% nerf. Alawi I think's in a good spot. Alawi is a lot weaker than Garen and Mundo. So, but not by a lot. It's close. Silco was one that if you asked a week ago, I think everyone would have said buff. People are starting to figure out the Silco builds now. I think Silco's fine. I don't think Silco gives a buff. If you buff Silco, I think he becomes the new Heimerdinger. So I think he's fine. Twitch, I think, is fine. Vi is like number 1 on the buff list for me. Vi is like, every time you itemize Vi, you're sad, and you're like, why did I put items on this champion? Which is really unfortunate because for a while during our testing, she was like really strong. Then they nerfed her. Now she's not. She's also the thing holding back Enforcer. Like, literally, if she was good, Enforcer would be great. So, yeah. Zoe, I think, is fine. I think there's a couple anomalies that push Zoe over the edge. Stuff like Kill Streak and Nothing Wasted. But Zoe, I think, herself is actually, like, close. I could see, like, tiny Rebel nerfs that will hurt her. Maybe. But, like, Zoe's fine. Caitlyn, I think... Caitlyn is just like, I wish her spell didn't have the snipe and was just the bomb, but it's fine. I could see a small buff to the bomb. She's close though. She'll never be a main carry with the way her spell works, but she does a lot of damage. It takes so goddamn long too. It's such a long spell. Jace frontline I think is close, but could actually use a slight damage buff. He just doesn't do enough damage for what you'd want him to do. Jace backline I think is fine. I think Jace backline's pretty close. Jinx, I think, is in a good spot. Just hard to play. And the thing is, by the way, a lot of the things I'm saying that are in a good spot, and some of you are like, no, they're weak. When we nerf the top, they'll be fine, right? Like, things like Jinx and Jace and Caitlyn suffer because Malz and Heimer exist. Nerf Malz and Heimer, they'll be fine. Don't want to do that thing where we accidentally go, wee! LeBlanc, I think, is fine. I wish she wasn't monolocked so long, but I think she's fine. So, I wouldn't nerf her. Malzahar is number 1 on my nerf list. Sorry, buddy. I love you to death. You are doing bad things to the game. Malzahar 1 carrying fights is insane. The difference of a Black Rose comp with and without Malzahar is laughably insane. And the fact that he needs 0 AP, doesn't care about Automata in the slightest. This guy needs to get kicked in the teeth. Sorry, buddy. Mordekaiser, I actually think is exactly fine where he should be. I would not buff or nerf Mordekaiser. Rumble, same. I actually think Rumble's fine. I think he's fun. Savika, if Savika needs a buff, it's like a flavor buff. It's like buffing the things that aren't flamethrower, but I think she's close. I would want data to confirm if I need to buff or nerf Savika, but I think she's really close. And then on the trait side, Academy, I personally think 4 and 5 need like the world's tiniest buff. Like if you told me this is supposed to be 2%, 3.5, 4.5, I'd believe it. 6 I think needs like a 1% buff to 9. 10 is probably overkill. Automata Academy is bad right now? No, Academy is definitely not bad. It's not bad. That's why I'm saying tiny buffs. Tiny. Automata. This is the trait that like needs the most love. This is my number 1 trait that needs love. This trait is garbage. I have had games where I got 3 Automata emblems and it was terrible and I'm like, what am I doing? The way it scales is just so bad. This 800 damage looks like a big number. It's not. I could believe this number could be 2,000 and the trait would be like, eh. Because it like procs once or twice a fight and then hits the Mundo with the Dragon Claw and does 400 anyway. So like, who cares? This trait needs love. This trait, like, this I think is the biggest trait miss of the set. Black Rose, like I said, I think 3 is fine. I think 4 maybe needs a tiny HP nerf in stage 2 or 3. Maybe, but it's close. 5 needs an HP nerf slightly. And then 7 needs a buff to its attack speed when he reses. Chem Baron, I think 4, 5, and 6 actually need a little bit of a buff, specifically around the HP. I don't think the actual cash outs need buffs, just the HP, so that you actually want to stay in the trait. Conqueror, I think, is fine. If you told me 2 Conqueror needed a combat buff, I'd believe it. The thing I hate, I love Conqueror as a trait. It's so fun to play. I hate the fact that if you don't have 4 Conqueror by like 2, 3, you shouldn't be playing the trait. It's like this entire trait is, did you get Swain on an opener? If you did, have fun. If you didn't, don't have fun. I hate that fact. So, otherwise, the trait's super fun. Emissary is in a great spot. Wouldn't change a thing about Emissary. Enforcer, the trait is in a good spot. Like I said, I think if you buff Steb, nerf Camille, buff Loris, buff TF, buff Vi, that's enough. Don't need to buff the trait too. So I would not touch this trait with a 10-foot pole. If anything, you could tell me that actually the attack speed here that says 30% could go down to 25 to compensate for the Steb, Loris, TF, Vi buffs. So, because that's definitely one of those ones that, like, if we read the patch notes, people are going to be like, 5 Enforcer buffs. So, just throwing that out. Experiment, I think, is fine. We already talked about Mundo. I think the trait itself is fine, and it's benefiting from Warwick coming in. Family, the trait, I actually think is perfect. Wouldn't touch the trait. Firelight, if I could take a flamethrower to this trait, I would. I hate this trait so much. But for now, leaving it alone. See, Arnold already. Not sure buffing 4 champs at once is a good idea. See? There's the Reddit comment for you. But yeah, Firelight, I think we just leave alone for now. Like I said, if anything needed reworked, this is the one that's starting to be like, I really hate how this trait is a Scar trait. Echo and Zeri barely want it. It's just a Scar trait, and that's dumb. I don't like that. Rebel. Rebel's like close to perfect. If you told me right now, it actually says after your team loses 20% of their health, a smoke signal appears. If you told me it was supposed to be 25%, or the 60% attack speed is supposed to be 50%, I could believe it. But like, this trait's damn near close to perfect. Like, this is kind of like the bar. I think a lot of traits need to be here. Scrap, similar. I think Scrap's great. I think Scrap's really good. I think Scrap gets beat by the S tier stuff. I think Scrap would get knocked down, you know, as soon as you nerf like that Malzenheimer and the Camille. I think Scrap's going to be great. Scrap's going to be good. Ambusher. My only problem with Ambusher is the gap between 4 and 5 is too big. I actually think, like, once Camille gets nerfed, you could actually buff the 3 and the 4 here. Because, like, you need 2, and then 3 is like, who gives a crap? 4 is like, eh, and then 5 is like, whoa, 5's a big deal. I don't want to bring 5 down. I think 5's actually in a good spot. I just think, like I said, you have to bring Camille down. Because, like, 5 Ambusher Echo is not a problem. 5 Ambusher Smeech, not a problem. But 5 Ambusher Camille, problem. So, Artillerist. This is the second worst trait in the game that needs a little love. Specifically at 4 and 6. You never want to play this at 4 and 6 right now. It doesn't help that Trist and Ezreal are meh. But, yeah. So, Smeech will become strong as hell. I didn't say buff 5. I didn't say buff 5. I said buff like 3 and 4. Bruiser I think's fine. I wouldn't touch Bruiser with a 10-foot pole. Dominator. Dominator's cap is insane. Dominator has the highest cap in the game. Players are starting to figure it out. So we definitely can't buff 6. That being said, I do actually think 2 and 4 do need a slight buff to make it a little easier to play. Mostly 2. I think 2 Amp Dominator is like such a fake trait. But Form Swapper I think is perfect. Wouldn't change a thing. Pit Fighter, I would just nerf 8. 8's a laughably overpowered trait for how easy it is to get. Quick Striker I think is fine. I've heard a lot of people ask for Quick Striker 5. I personally think the game's better that it doesn't have a Quick Striker 5. I don't think we really want to just have... It's literally Ambusher, right? Like, what do the 3 and 4 do? You just have to go 5. I am glad Quick Striker's 4. I'd leave it alone. Sentinel I think is good. Sniper I think is good. You could argue Sniper 4 is weak, but it's not. And 6 Sniper is insane, so I wouldn't change that. Sorcerer, third worst trait. Sorcerer, I would buff the 6 and the 8. The 6 and the 8 are laughably bad. 6 and the 8 are silly. You could even argue maybe the 4. The only reason I wouldn't buff the 4 is because it's part of the Black Rose comp, and that doesn't need love. I'd rather you have to go deep into Sorcerer to get the benefit. But Sorcerer could use some love. The problem also, though, is that Sorcerer's late-game tank is Swain, and we already talked about Swain's problems, so I don't think that's going to get fixed. But, like, I think this number could go all the way up to 150, and it might still be mediocre, but we'll see. Visionary's fine. Wouldn't touch Visionary. You could make the argument that 6 isn't really worth it, but eh. And Watcher, I think, is fine, just carried by Scar. If Scar gets nerfed, Watcher's fine. There you go. That's my off-the-cuff rundown of where I believe the meta is with no data. Again, that is just my personal opinion. So, there you go. Now do every augment? No. No. No.